Hey guys, tonight we are going to travel back in time, all the way to 70-something BC, to ancient Spain, to witness what is essentially a Roman murder, mystery dinner party that went horribly wrong. It's a story of ambition, betrayal, and a brilliant general who nearly broke the Roman Republic from the outside. And since we're joining a rebel army, let's be honest, your survival odds aren't exactly stellar. You might not even make it past the first day, but hey, that's what makes it exciting, right? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to see where you're all tuning in from, so drop your city and the time in the comments below. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air in Rome is thick with something more than just the usual smell of wood smoke and damp Tiber River mud. It's fear. It's a low, constant hum of anxiety that you feel in the marketplace, in the bathhouses, even in the supposed sanctity of your own home. The civil wars have left scars on everyone. The struggle between the political factions of Gaius Marius and Lucius Cornelius Sulla has just reached its bloody conclusion, and Sulla, the victor, is now the undisputed dictator of Rome, and he is in the mood for some spring cleaning. Except his version of cleaning involves lists. They call them the prescriptions. Every day, a new list is posted in the forum. Your name is on it. You stare at the freshly painted letters, and your blood runs cold. Being on this list doesn't just mean you've lost your citizenship or your property. It means any Roman citizen can legally kill you and claim a reward. Your crime: you backed the wrong guy. You were a supporter of Marius, a Marian, and now you are officially disposable. Your friends and neighbors who yesterday shared wine with you now avert their eyes. Some might even be calculating the reward money. You have two choices: stay and wait for a bounty hunter's blade in a dark alley, or run. You choose to run. But where do you run to? The entire Italian peninsula is Sulla's playground. The answer comes in whispers passed from one nervous fugitive to another. There's a man, a general, one of ours. HES gathering the scattered remnants of the Mauryan faction, not in Italy, but far away on the wild frontier of the Republic, Hispania, modern-day Spain. His name is Quintus Sertorius. So you join them. You become part of this strange, desperate fraternity, the Roman Fugitive Club. You find yourself on a creaking, overcrowded ship, sharing stale bread and brackish water with men who, just a few months ago, were senators, magistrates, and wealthy landowners. Now, they're just like you, hunted, dispossessed, their lives reduced to a single gamble on one man's leadership. The journey is miserable, the sea is rough, but for the first time in weeks, there's a flicker of something other than despair. It's hope, a fragile, flickering thing, but it's there. Sulla's prescriptions were a masterstroke of political terror, but here's a little detail that often gets lost in the big picture. It was also a massive, state-sanctioned real estate scam. When you were proscribed all your property, your house in the city, your farm in the countryside, your workshops was confiscated by the state and then auctioned off for pennies on the dollar to Sulla's supporters. It was a brilliant way to destroy his enemies and enrich his friends in one fell swoop. Many of the men now huddling on the deck of this ship with you aren't just fleeing for their lives. They're fleeing the complete annihilation of their family's legacy. As the ship cuts through the Mediterranean, you and your fellow refugees talk. You talk about Sertorius. Some called him the last true Roman, the final defender of the old republican ideals against Sulla's tyranny. They believe he is building a government in exile, a true Rome across the sea, waiting for the day when you can all march home and restore what was lost. Others are more cynical. They see him as a pragmatist, an opportunist who's simply using the chaos to carve out his own kingdom and all, and Rome has never fully managed to tame. And this is a question that historians still argue about to this day. Was Sertorius a patriot trying to preserve the flame of the Republic, or was he just another ambitious warlord in an age full of them, cloaking his personal ambition in the noble language of liberty? The truth, as is often the case, is probably somewhere messily in between. For you right now, it doesn't matter. He is your only option. He is the one man who has successfully stood up to Sulla's regime and survived. He is the leader of the Roman Fugitive Club, and you are its newest member. As the hazy coastline of Hispania appears on the horizon, you feel a knot in your stomach that is a mixture of terror and relief. The land looks rugged, unfamiliar, nothing like the rolling hills of home. You see rocky shores and dense forests. You know this isn't Rome. But as the ship glides into a hidden cove, and you see the familiar sight of Roman-style legal standards planted on the beach, you realize that for now, this is it. This is your new world, your new fight. Your journey as a Roman fugitive is over, but your life as a SC Artorian rebel has just begun. The first thing you notice is the ground. It doesn't move. After weeks of the ship's constant, nauseating sway, the solid, unyielding earth beneath your sandals feels like the greatest luxury in the world. You take a wobbly step onto the Spanish soil, and then another, feeling your land legs return. The air here smells different from Italy. Gone is the scent of cypress trees and Roman city life. Here it's a mix of salt from the sea, sharp pine from the forests clinging to the hillsides, and a dry, earthy dust that promises hot days and cool nights. This is Hispania. It's not the civilized, tamed province you might have imagined from maps back in Rome. This is a frontier. The landscape is raw, muscular. Jagged mountains claw at the sky in the distance, their peaks looking sharp enough to tear the clouds. The forests are dark and dense, not the well-managed groves of home. You get the immediate sense that this is a land that tolerates Roman presence. It doesn't welcome it. And you are no longer the master here. You are a guest, and a rather unwelcome one at that. Your new comrades, the men who greet you on the beach, reflect this wildness. They are Romans, yes, but they are a hotter, more withered version. Their skin is tanned to the color of old leather from the Spanish sun, and their eyes have the weary squint of men who have spent too long staring at hostile horizons. They clap you on the back, a rough, friendly gesture. And you hear Latin, but it's interspersed with strange-sounding words, bits of local dialects picked up from years of campaigning. And then you see them, the locals, the real masters of this land. They are not the disorganized rabble you might have heard about in the forum. They are fierce-looking men, the Celtiberian and Lusitania and tribesmen who form the backbone of Sertorius' army. They are taller than many of the Romans, with wild hair and beards. They don't wear the segmented armor of the legions. Instead, they're clad in simple wool tunics, some with leather vests, moving with a fluid grace that speaks of a life spent in the mountains and forests. They carry round shields or the distinct small buckler called a kytra, and their weapon of choice is not the Roman gladius, but the wicked, inward-curving sword known as the falcata, a blade renowned for its brutal chopping power. They watch you, the newcomers, with a detached curiosity, their faces unreadable. This is the strange new world you've entered. High Roman renegade camp that is a cultural melting pot. You see a Roman centurion, a man who probably owns a nice villa back in Italy, or did, before Sulla took it, trying to demonstrate a siege engine to a group of tribal chieftains who look on with polite skepticism. You hear the rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer, but the smith is a local, forging a falcata, not a gladius. The bread you're given is coarse and heavy, made from local grain, and the wine is rough on the palate. A far cry from the fine F.A.L. Ernie and you once knew. This is the great historical reality of Spain that Rome never quite wanted to admit. It was never an easy conquest. Rome first got its foothold here during the wars against Carthage, over a century ago. They came to kick Hannibal out and decided to stay for the resources. But the local tribes never stopped fighting. For more than 130 years, this place has been a brutal, grinding insurgency. A long series of Roman governors and generals have had their careers and reputations shattered against the rocks of the Spanish interior. This long history of resistance is precisely why Sertorius could thrive here. He didn't create the fire of rebellion. He just found one already smoldering and expertly fanned it into a raging inferno. And what were those resources Rome wanted so badly? It's not just about land. Spain was the Roman Republic's treasure chest. The mountains were laced with silver. The silver mines here were legendary, funding Rome's expansion for generations. Control Spain and you control a significant portion of the Republic's wealth. It also produced huge amounts of grain, olive oil, and a particularly prized, if pungent, commodity, garum. This fermented fish sauce was the ketchup of the ancient world, an absolute staple in Roman cooking, and the best stuff came from the coasts of Spain. So Sertorius isn't just leading an army of exiles, he is sitting on a strategic gold mine, or silver mine, to be more precise. You look around the bustling, chaotic camp. You see the wary respect between the Roman veterans and the tribal warriors. They fight together, they eat together, but you can feel the invisible line between them. And this is where historians still scratch their heads. How deep did the loyalty of the Spanish tribes to Sertorius actually run? Did they see him as a true liberator, a champion fighting for their freedom against the endless greed of Rome? Or was he simply the most effective anti-Roman warlord they had ever seen, a convenient tool, a lesser of two evils to be used against the hated governors sent from the capital? You look at a Lusitania warrior sharpening his falcata, his eyes dark and thoughtful, and you realize you don't know the answer. The success of this entire enterprise, this Rome in exile, seems to balance on the shoulders of one man. The man who somehow convinced these disparate, distrustful groups to fight for a common cause. Your new boss, and you haven't even met him yet. A murmur runs through the camp. He's coming. The casual chatter dies down. The hammering from the blacksmith's tent pauses, and men straighten up. You feel a jolt of nervous anticipation. This is it. You're about to meet the man you've gambled your entire future on. You crane your neck, trying to see past the shoulders of a seasoned legionary in front of you. And then you see him. Quintus Sertorius is not what you expected. You were maybe picturing a giant of a man, a hulking warrior radiating brute force. But the man walking through the camp is of average height, maybe in his early 50s, with a lean, weary build. His hair is starting to gray at the temples, and his face is a roadmap of his life. Creased from the sun, lined with old worries, but it's his eyes that hold you. He is only one. A scar from some long ago battle has left one eye socket empty, a milky white ruin. The other eye, though, is sharp, intelligent, and seems to take in everything at a glance. It moves from man to man, from a pile of supplies to a newly repaired chariot wheel, missing nothing. It's the eye of a predator, but also of a master strategist. He doesn't stride or swagger. He walks with a purpose, a quiet energy that commands more respect than any shouting or bravado ever could. He's not dressed in some general's ornate armor. He wears a simple, dark red officer's tunic, well worn but clean, and the same hobnailed military sandals or collie guy as his men. There's no pretense, no air of superiority. He stops to have a quiet word with the centurion, his good eye crinkling at the corners as he listens intently. He then claps a Lusitania chieftain on the shoulder, speaking to him in what sounds like passable, if heavily accented, Celtiberian. The chieftain, a man who looked like he could snap a Roman in two, actually smiles and nods. This is his genius. It's not just about tactics on a map. It's about people. You're witnessing his greatest skill in action, the ability to connect. He makes every man, whether a dispossessed Roman senator or a Spanish goat herder, feel seen, feel important. He remembers names, asks about families. He has built this army not just on promises of victory, but on a foundation of personal loyalty. Men don't just fight for the cause, they fight for him. The ancient writers, particularly Plutarch, paint a vivid picture of the man. Sertorius came from a modest, respectable family in rural Italy. He wasn't one of the blue-blooded aristocrats from Rome. He made his name the old-fashioned way, through sheer talent and courage on the battlefield. He fought in the brutal wars against the Germanic tribes in the north, where he earned his reputation for being both incredibly brave and cunning. There's a famous story about him during that campaign. He needed to scout a barbarian camp, so he disguised himself, dyeing his hair and learning just enough of their language to pass. He walked right into the enemy camp, gathered the intelligence he needed, and walked out again. This wasn't a general who sent others to do the dangerous work. He did it himself. This is one of those little details that tells you everything you need to know about his personality. He was a risk-taker, but a calculated one. And he understood that information, knowing your enemy, was more valuable than 1,000 extra swords. It was during these early campaigns that he lost his eye. an injury he was said to be immensely proud of. He saw it not as a disfigurement, but as a permanent trophy, a visible testament to his valor that he carried with him always. While other men might display captured standards or medals, he displayed his scars. He finally reaches your group of new arrivals. He looks you over, his single eye assessing, weighing. He doesn't give a grand speech. He just speaks to you, his voice calm and steady. He tells you that here, it doesn't matter who you were in Rome, what family you came from, or how much wealth you lost. Here, you are all Romans. You are all soldiers. Here, your worth will be measured by your courage and your loyalty to the cause of building a new, just republic, free from the tyranny of men like Sulla. It's a simple speech, but it lands with the force of a battering ram. Aegeus not just offering you a place in his army, Aegeus offering you a chance to reclaim your identity, your purpose. You left Rome a fugitive, a nobody. Aegeus just made you a citizen of his new Rome. But there's another side to him, a side the admiring historians like Plutarch touch on but perhaps don't fully explore. To build this alliance, he had to make compromises. He had to play the part of a Roman general to his Roman followers, and the part of a sympathetic liberator to his Spanish allies. He was, in essence, a master actor, constantly balancing the expectations of two very different audiences. And this is a point of debate among modern scholars. Was he a sincere unifier or a brilliant manipulator? Was his empathy for the Spanish tribes genuine, or was it a carefully constructed performance designed to secure their manpower and resources? This duality, this need to be two things at once, would ultimately become one of the great pressures of his command. As he moves on, leaving you and the other newcomers standing there with his words still ringing in your ears, you understand. You see why thousands of men would follow this one-eyed general to the ends of the earth and fight against the most powerful military machine in the world. He has given you more than just a safe haven. He has given you back your pride, and you would do anything for him. Over the next few days, you begin to settle into the rhythm of camp life. The initial shock of your new surroundings gives way to a routine of drills, guard duty, and the constant, low-level buzz of a military encampment preparing for war. But there's something else in the air, a peculiar sort of legend in the making that everyone seems to talk about in hushed, almost reverent tones. It involves Sertorius, but it's not about his past victories or his strategic genius. It's about a deer. A small, pure white fawn. One afternoon you see it for yourself. Sertorius is conferring with his senior officers in the center of the camp, poring over a crude map drawn in the dirt. Suddenly, a soldier comes running up out of breath, leading the most unusual creature you've ever seen. It's a young deer so perfectly white it seems to glow in the afternoon sun. It has no spots, no blemishes, just a coat of snowy fur and large, dark, intelligent eyes. It shows no fear, nuzzling the soldier's hand before trotting directly to Sertorius. The general smiles, a rare, unguarded expression of genuine affection. He strokes the fawn's head, and it leans against his leg as if it were a loyal dog. The assembled officers, hardened Roman veterans and fierce Spanish chieftains alike, watch the scene with a kind of awe. Sertorius turns to them, his one eye twinkling. "She has come with a message from the gods," he announces, his voice carrying across the quiet camp. He then proceeds to share a piece of divine intelligence, news of a small Roman supply column that will be vulnerable to an ambush, or a rival tribe that is considering switching its allegiance. You watch this, completely baffled. Is this for real? Does he actually believe this? Does anyone else? You soon learn the story. The white fawn was a gift. A local hunter found it, and, knowing Sertorius was a man who appreciated unique things, brought it to him. Sertorius saw an opportunity, a stroke of public relations genius. He tamed the fawn, letting it roam freely. He then began to tell everyone that it was a sacred gift from the goddess Diana, the Roman goddess of the hunt and the wilderness. He claimed the fawn could understand the language of the gods and would whisper secrets directly into his ear. And here's the clever part. He used it perfectly. Whenever his own network of spies and scouts brought him a piece of valuable, non-public information, an enemy movement, a planned betrayal, a hidden supply depot, he would wait. H.E.D. let the fawn disappear for a day or two, Then he would stage a public reunion, just like the one you witnessed. He would stroke the fawn, pretend to listen intently, and then announce the divine revelation as if it had come directly from the heavens. When the information inevitably proved correct, his legend grew. To his Roman soldiers, men steeped in a culture of omens, auguries, and divine signs, this was powerful stuff. It elevated Sertorius from a mere general to a man touched by the gods, someone with a destiny to fulfill. It gave them a supernatural confidence in his leadership. But its real power was with his Spanish allies. The Celtiberian and Lusitania tribes had their own deep-rooted beliefs in nature spirits, sacred animals, and shamans who could communicate with the other world. For them, a Roman general who had a magical white deer as his spirit guide wasn't just powerful, he was one of them. He understood their world. He respected their beliefs. It was a bridge between two vastly different cultures, built on a foundation of brilliant, theatrical deception. This right here is a fantastic little piece of historical trivia that illuminates the ancient mindset. We live in an age of data and satellite imagery. For them, information was a murky, unreliable commodity. A leader who seemed to have a direct line to a higher power, who could produce consistently accurate intelligence, seemed magical. Sertorius essentially created a mythical intelligence agency with a single, four-legged agent. Of course, the whole thing was a performance. Sertorius was a rational, pragmatic Roman. He didn't believe the fawn was magic, but he understood that what people believe is a force of nature in itself. He was exploiting the universal human need for certainty and for a connection to something greater than oneself. The long-term effect of this is still a subject of academic debate. Did this reliance on a supernatural source of authority ultimately weaken his command? By positioning himself as a semi-divine figure, did he create a situation where any failure, any setback, could be seen not just as a military mistake, but as a sign that the gods had abandoned him? Some historians argue that this was a dangerous gamble, one that painted him into a corner. If the fawn were to die, or if his prophecies began to fail, the entire edifice of his authority could crumble overnight. It created an impossibly high standard to maintain. You see the fawn trot off, disappearing into the woods at the edge of the camp. The officers are now discussing the divinely revealed ambush, their voices filled with a new energy. You look at the faces of the men around you. The Romans see a hero favored by Diana. The Spaniards see a chieftain with a powerful spirit animal. And you see a master of psychology, a man who understood that in a war of rebellion, perception is reality. The white fawn was more valuable than a whole legion of soldiers because it controlled the one thing that truly mattered, the hearts and minds of his followers. The fragile piece of your new life is shattered by news from the east. It travels on the lips of merchants, on coded messages carried by swift riders, and finally, it arrives as an official proclamation that is read aloud in the camp. Rome is coming, and they aren't sending some provincial governor with a couple of understrength legions this time. The Senate, growing increasingly alarmed and frankly embarrassed by Sertorius' continued success, has dispatched two of its heaviest hitters. They are sending Quintus Caecilius Metellus Pius, and with him, a rising star of the Sulan faction, a young man named Gnaeus Pompeius, or as we know him, Pompey the Great. A chill runs through the camp. These are not just any generals. Metellus Pius is the old guard. He is a seasoned, respected, if somewhat unimaginative, commander from one of Rome's most distinguished aristocratic families. His whole life has been a textbook example of a Roman noble's career. He is predictable, methodical, and relentless. He fights by the boat. He will build fortified camps, secure his supply lines, and try to grind you down through slow, patient attrition. He represents the sheer, overwhelming weight of the Roman state. He is the anvil. Pompey is the opposite. He is the hammer. He is young, ambitious, brilliant, and utterly ruthless. He made his name during Sulla's civil wars, earning the nickname Adulescens Conrefix, the teenage butcher, for his merciless pursuit of Marian supporters. Unlike Metellus, he is not an aristocrat. He is a new man, his family being the first to rise to prominence, and he is hungry to prove himself. He has Sulla's backing and a burning desire to earn a triumph, the highest military honor a Roman general could achieve. Pompey is creative, daring, and unpredictable. He is everything Sertorius is, but on the other side. The arrival of these two men changes the entire dynamic of the war. This is no longer a regional insurgency. It's now a full-blown Roman civil war being fought on Spanish soil. It's the established power of Metellus and the raw ambition of Pompey versus the cunning and charisma of Sertorius. The best of Rome fighting the best of Rome. You and your comrades are put on high alert. The drills become more intense, the watch rotations longer. You spend days marching under the hot Spanish sun, not to fight but to move. Sertorius' strategy is immediately clear. He refuses to meet the combined enemy force head-on. That would be suicide. Instead, he begins a masterful campaign of harassment and evasion, a deadly game of cat and mouse across the vast, rugged landscape of the Iberian Peninsula. You find yourselves launching lightning-fast raids on their supply lines, appearing out of the forests at dawn to overwhelm a foraging party, only to melt away before the main legion can respond. You divert rivers to flood their campsites. You set clever ambushes in narrow mountain passes where the legion's superior numbers are useless. Sertorius is everywhere and nowhere at once. He forces the Roman commanders to split their forces, chasing ghosts. He uses his intimate knowledge of the terrain and the loyalty of the local population to his advantage. A Spanish farmer will happily sell grain to your quartermaster, but will burn his own fields before letting Pompey's men have it. This period of the war is a fascinating case study in asymmetrical warfare, and it gave rise to one of the more debated what-ifs in Roman history. Pompey, frustrated and repeatedly outmaneuvered, famously wrote a letter to the Senate back in Rome. In it, he complained bitterly. He said that he was fighting not just a general, but a ghost, a Hannibal-like figure who toyed with him. He claimed that his army was exhausted, his supplies were running out, and that Sertorius was growing stronger every day. He essentially threatened that if the Senate didn't send him more men and more money, he might be forced to abandon Spain and the war would spill back into Italy itself. Historians still argue about this letter. Was Pompey truly on the brink of defeat, as his words suggest? Or was this a classic piece of political maneuvering, an exaggeration designed to squeeze more resources out of a tight-fisted Senate and to preemptively excuse any lack of a swift, decisive victory on his part? It's hard to say for sure. Pompey was a master of self-promotion, and painting his enemy as a near-superhuman foe only made his eventual victory seem all the more impressive. But for you on the ground, the struggle feels very real. The fighting is brutal and constant. It's a war of small skirmishes, not grand battles. 1 week, you are shadowing Metellus' legions in the south. The next you are racing north to counter a move by Pompey. Life is a blur of forced marches, cold rations, and the ever-present tension of knowing that two of Rome's most formidable armies are hunting you. You see Sertorius' genius firsthand. He never lets Metellus and Pompey unite their full strength. He keeps them separated, guessing, and reacting to his moves. He is the ultimate puppet master, pulling the strings from his hidden mountain strongholds. You are winning, but not in the way Romans are used to winning. There are no captured eagles, no massive fields of slain enemies. Your victories are measured in delayed supply wagons, frustrated Roman generals, and another day of survival. You are surviving, even thriving, against the odds, but the pressure is immense, and you know this deadly dance can't go on forever. As the war drags on, you start to notice the subtle hierarchies within your own command structure. Sertorius is the sun around which everything orbits, a charismatic center of gravity. But even the sun has planets, and the largest, closest planet in this system is a man named Marcus Bernavento. He is, for all intents and purposes, a second in command, and he is not a happy man. You see him often, usually standing just behind Sertorius during briefings, his face set in a permanent mask of sour dissatisfaction. Where Sertorius is lean and energetic, Perperna is softer, with the pale complexion of a man who prefers the comforts of a tent to the rigors of a march. Hes, an aristocrat, a former preacher from a noble Roman family, and he carries himself with an air of entitlement that clashes with the gritty, egalitarian atmosphere of the camp. He never quite looks comfortable here. He looks like a man who believes this whole Spanish adventure is beneath him. The story of how Perperna and his army joined Sertorius is a crucial piece of this puzzle. He wasn't one of the original fugitives who trickled into Spain one by one. After Sulla took Rome, Perperna had fled with a significant number of soldiers and a sizable treasury, setting up his own little refugee army in Sardinia. He had ambitions of his own, but when Metellus was sent to crush him, Perperna was forced to flee again, this time with his entire force to Spain. He didn't come to serve under Sertorius. He came expecting to be an equal partner, or perhaps even the senior commander, given his noble birth and the army he brought with him. But his soldiers had other ideas. They had heard tales of Sertorius, his victories, his charisma, his magic white fawn. They saw a winner. They essentially mutinied, forcing a humiliated Perperna to subordinate himself and his legions to Sertorius's command. So from the very beginning, their relationship was poisoned. Perperna smiles and nods in all the right places. He carries out his orders, but you can see the resentment simmering just beneath the surface. He watches the easy camaraderie between Sertorius and the Spanish chieftains with a look of disdain. He sees the adulation in the eyes of the common soldiers for their one-eyed leader, and his own face tightens. In his mind, he should be the one receiving that adoration. He is the nobleman, the former praetor. Sertorius is just a provincial upstart from a minor family. This is the classic toxic dynamic of ambition and jealousy. Perperna's presence introduces a political sickness into the heart of the Sertorian camp. While everyone else is focused on the external enemy, Pompey and Metellus, a more dangerous enemy is festering within. Here's a small but telling detail from the historical sources. Perperna was known for his lavish lifestyle, even in the field. While Sertorius ate the same simple rations as his men, Perperna maintained a separate, more luxurious mess. He had better wine, finer food, and more comfortable quarters. It was a small but constant declaration of his own importance, a way of signaling that he was different, separate, and superior to the man he was forced to call his commander. This physical and symbolic separation was a breeding ground for dissent. Discontented officers, those who felt slighted by Sertorius or who were simply weary of the long war, began to gravitate towards Perperna's tent. It became a sort of shadow headquarters, a place where grievances could be aired and ambitions whispered. You might walk past his tent in the evening and hear the sound of laughter, a little too loud, a little too forced, and you know they are not talking about battlefield tactics. They are talking about their leader. The academic debate here is fascinating. Was Perperna a master conspirator from the start, actively plotting to overthrow Sertorius from the moment he arrived? Or was he simply a weak, vain man who became a magnet for the dissatisfaction of others, gradually drawn into a conspiracy that he wasn't clever enough to initiate himself? The ancient sources, mostly written by men who admired Sertorius, tend to paint Perperna as a villainous plotter or Roman Iago. But some modern historians suggest a more nuanced picture, a man consumed by a toxic cocktail of wounded pride and genuine fear. He might have seen Sertorius's populist style and his close alliance with the barbarian Spaniards as a dangerous deviation from Roman tradition, a threat that needed to be neutralized for the good of the cause. You don't need to be a historian to feel the bad vibes. You see the way Perperna's men, the ones who came with him from Sardinia, stick together. They form a distinct clique within the larger army. There's a subtle us versus them mentality. You are a Sertorian, loyal to the one-eyed general. They are Perperna's men, their loyalty pledged to the sour-faced nobleman. The army is no longer a unified whole. A hairline fracture has appeared in the foundation of this rebel republic. It's almost invisible for now, but you know that under the immense pressure of the war with Rome, a hairline fracture can quickly become a chasm. The greatest threat to Sertorius isn't Pompey's legions on the battlefield, it's the man standing right behind him. The war against Pompey and Metellus settles into a brutal rhythm, and you are forced to become an expert in a style of fighting that feels deeply un-Roman. This is not the clean, decisive warfare of legion against legion on an open plain. This is a masterclass in guerrilla warfare, taught by the best professor in the ancient world, Sertorius himself. Your days are defined by mountains and dust. You learn to read the landscape not as a traveler, but as a predator. A narrow ravine is no longer just a ravine, it's a potential kill zone. A dense forest is not an obstacle. It's a hiding place, a staging ground for a dawn raid. You forget what it feels like to march in neat, orderly columns. Instead, you move in small, swift companies, appearing on a ridge to taunt a Roman column, showering them with javelins on sling stones, and then vanishing back into the wilderness before their cavalry can even be deployed. Sertorius' strategy is built onto pillars, speed and local knowledge. He has an almost supernatural ability to anticipate his enemy's moves, thanks to his extensive network of local spies and his own tactical genius. While Pompey is bogged down trying to move his heavy legions and their cumbersome baggage trains through the terrible Spanish terrain, your units travel light. You carry little more than your weapons, a water skin, and a few days' worth of parched grain in a sack. You learn to live off the land, to find water where it seems there is none, and to sleep under the stars. The Spanish warriors in your ranks are the true masters of this. You watch them, trying to learn. They move through the rocky landscape with the silent confidence of mountain goats. They can track a Roman patrol from a mile away by the dust cloud it raises. They teach you how to use the falcata not for fencing like a gladius, but for powerful, disabling chops aimed at limbs and shields. You learn that a well-aimed sling stone from a Balearic slinger can be just as deadly as an arrow, capable of shattering a helmet or a bone from 100 paces. One of Sertorius' most famous tactics, which you now get to experience firsthand, is the targeted disruption of supply lines. This is the unglamorous, grinding work that wins this kind of war. You spend weeks doing nothing but shadowing a Roman foraging expedition. You don't attack them directly. Instead, you poison wells ahead of their path. You set grass fires to destroy grazing land for their cavalry horses and pack mules. You ambush their small scouting parties, creating a bubble of fear and uncertainty around the main force. The Roman soldiers become jumpy, demoralized, and hungry. A legionary can't fight if he hasn't eaten, and his horse can't charge if it's dying of thirst. This brings up a fascinating tidbit of military logistics. We often think of ancient armies as just masses of fighting men, but they were also massive eating machines. A single Roman legion at full strength, along with its support staff and cavalry, could require over 10 tons of grain per day. Add to that the fodder for hundreds of mules and horses. Supplying an army of tens of thousands, like the combined forces of Pompey and Metellus, in a hostile and barren landscape was a logistical nightmare. Sertorius wasn't fighting the legions, he was fighting their supply wagons, and he was winning. He also understands the psychology of his enemy perfectly. He knows that Metellus is old and cautious, so he harasses him relentlessly, never giving him the set-piece battle he craves, frustrating him into making mistakes. He knows Pompey is young and desperate for glory, so he taunts him, dangles the prospect of a battle, and then pulls it away at the last minute, making him look foolish. He famously referred to Metellus as the old woman and Pompey as the boy, insults that were gleefully repeated around your campfires and, more importantly, surely made their way back to the generals themselves, chipping away at their morale. But there is a historical debate about the long-term viability of this strategy. Guerrilla warfare is the strategy of the weaker side. It can prolong a conflict indefinitely, it can bleed an enemy dry, but can it achieve a decisive final victory? Historians are divided. Some argue that Sertorius' strategy was brilliant and sustainable, that he was slowly creating a viable, independent state in Spain, and that Pompey's desperate letter to the Senate was proof that it was working. They believe he could have held out for years, perhaps waiting for political change in Rome that would allow him to return. Others argue that it was ultimately a dead end. He could sting and harass, but he could never deliver a knockout blow. He cowed and marched on Rome from Spain. His strategy was one of survival, not of ultimate victory. As long as Rome was willing to keep throwing men and money at the problem, they would eventually corner him. The guerrilla model, they argue, traps you in a perpetual state of reaction. You are always the mouse, never the cat. For now, you don't have time for such grand strategic debates. You are too busy trying to survive. You are crouched behind a rock, watching a dust trail on the horizon that signifies another Roman patrol. The sun beats down on your neck. You are tired, you are thirsty. and you miss the feeling of a soft bed. But as the signal is given and you rise with your comrades to launch another swift, sudden attack, you also feel a thrill. You are part of something extraordinary. You are defying the greatest power in the world, not with brute force, but with cunning courage, and the land itself as your greatest ally. The tide of the war begins to turn in your favor, and the feeling in the camp is electric. The initial anxiety of facing down Rome's finest has been replaced by a hardened confidence swagger. Your unorthodox tactics are not just working, they are producing tangible, humiliating defeats for the enemy. Victory, once a distant hope, now feels like a regular occurrence. The biggest prize is Pompey. The teenage butcher came to Spain expecting a quick, glorious campaign that would cement his reputation. Instead, he finds himself in a quagmire, constantly being outsmarted. The climax comes at the Battle of the Sucro River. Pompey, eager for a decisive win before Metellus can arrive and share the glory, engages Sertorius' army near the riverbank as dusk is falling. You are there in the thick of it. The fighting is chaotic and desperate. Sertorius, as always, leads from the front, his one eye blazing. He places his best troops not in the center as Roman tradition dictates, but on the wings, anticipating Pompey's aggressive flanking maneuvers. At one point, you see Pompey himself, a powerful figure on a magnificent horse, charge deep into your lines. For a moment, it looks like his personal bravery might turn the battle, but he gets surrounded. A massive African soldier, in Sertorius' personal guard, a man of legendary strength, wounds Pompey's horse with a spear. The horse, maddened with pain, throws Pompey in bolts, carrying its fantastically valuable, jewel-encrusted harness and saddle close with it. Your comrades, seeing the glittering prize, lose all discipline for a moment and start fighting over the horse's fancy trappings. This brief moment of chaos is all the opening Pompey needs. Wounded and on foot, he manages to escape in the confusion. He is beaten, humiliated, and has lost his very expensive horse. The next day, Metellus' army arrives. He has been more successful against the wing of the Sertorian army commanded by Perperna. No surprise there, and he expects to find a shattered enemy. Instead, he finds Sertorius, fresh from his victory over Pompey, ready for round two. Sertorius is reported to have quipped, "If this old woman hadn't turned up, I'd have given the boy a good thrashing and sent him back to Rome." The boast energizes everyone. You fight Metellus to a standstill. At the end of 2 days of brutal fighting, both sides are exhausted, but you hold the field. You have faced down Pompey and Metellus, the two greatest generals Rome could send, and you have either beaten them or fought them to a draw. The news spreads like wildfire through the Spanish tribes. More chieftains flock to your banner, bringing fresh warriors and supplies. Sertorius' reputation reaches its zenith. He is no longer just a rebel. He is the master of Spain. It's during this period of high morale that a truly remarkable offer arrives at your ken. A delegation comes not from a Spanish tribe but from the east. They are ambassadors from Mithridates VI of Pontus, a powerful king in Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, and Rome's most persistent and dangerous enemy in the east. Mithridates has been fighting Rome for decades. He sees in Sertorius a kindred spirit, a brilliant commander, creating a second front that keeps Rome occupied. He makes a formal proposal for an alliance. He offers Sertorius vast sums of money and a fleet of ships. In return, he asks for Sertorius as the legitimate government of Rome in exile, to formally recognize his claims to the Roman province of Asia. It's a stunning moment. You, a ragged army of fugitives and rebels, are now being treated like a world power engaging in international diplomacy. Sertorius agrees to the alliance. He accepts the money and the ships, but in a move of pure Roman arrogance and pride, he refuses to cede the province of Asia. He sends some of his own officers to act as military advisors to Mithridates, but he makes it clear he is the Roman, and he will decide the fate of Roman territory. It's an incredibly bold, almost cheeky, display of confidence. HES basically telling Mithridates, "I'll take your money, but don't forget who's in charge." This alliance is a huge geopolitical victory. It gives you legitimacy and, more importantly, cash. But this moment is also, paradoxically, the beginning of the end. Scholars still debate the psychological impact of this success. Did it make Sertorius overconfident? Did his victories, his undisputed command, and now his international recognition, cause him to lose the common touch that had been his greatest asset? It's a classic case of a leader who excels in the struggle but falters at the peak of his power. The pressure to maintain this level of success, to be the invincible hero, must have been immense. For now, though, you and your comrades are celebrating. You drink captured Roman wine and boast about how you sent Pompey running. The camp is filled with a sense of invincibility. You feel like you are on the cusp of achieving the impossible. You have beaten the best. You have allies across the sea. You are building a new republic in Spain. The future seems bright. But as you look around at the celebrating soldiers, you might catch a glimpse of Perperna and his circle of officers. They are drinking too, but they are not celebrating Sertorius's victory. They are watching, their eyes filled with a corrosive mixture of envy and resentment. In the bright glare of Sertorius's success, the shadows behind him are growing longer and darker. Victory has a taste, and for a while, it tastes sweet. But as the seasons turn and the war grinds on, a different flavor begins to emerge. It's the bitter aftertaste of a conflict that has no end in sight. The initial euphoria of beating Pompeian Metellus fades, replaced by the grim reality of a long, attritional struggle. You are winning the battles, but you are not winning the war. The land itself begins to show the strain. Fields you once marched through, full of grain, now lie fallow and scorched. Villages that once welcomed you are now shuttered and empty, their people having fled the constant back and forth of the armies. The loyalty of the Spanish tribes, once your greatest asset, begins to fray at the edges. They signed up for a swift war of liberation, not a perpetual stalemate. Their warriors are homesick, their fields are untended, and their chieftains are growing weary of the endless demands for men and supplies. You feel it in the camp every day. The mood is heavier. The easy camaraderie of the early days is replaced by a low-grade, constant grumbling. The jokes are fewer, the tempers shorter. The Roman soldiers, men like you who dreamed of a triumphant return to Italy, are starting to realize that home is a concept that grows more distant with each passing year. They are exiles, and it looks increasingly like they will die as exiles. The war has become their entire life, and many are sick of it. This is the psychological toll of a long war, something the grand histories often gloss over. It's not just about casualties and supply lines, it's about the slow erosion of hope. Every morning you wake up to the same reality. More marching, more skirmishes, more time away from a life you can barely remember. The initial righteous anger against Sulla est Irene has cooled into a dull, aching fatigue. Sertorius, the brilliant commander, now faces a different kind of enemy, one he can't outmaneuver with clever tactics, war weariness. His response to this growing discontent is where things start to go wrong. He pushes his men harder. He demands more from his allies. He becomes stricter, less patient. The leader who once won men over with his personal charm now begins to rule more through fear and authority. You start to see public floggings for minor infractions. Deserters who were once treated with a degree of understanding are now hunted down and executed as a brutal example to others. The discipline becomes iron-fisted because Sertorius knows that a tired, demoralized army is a fragile thing. He is trying to hold it all together through sheer force of will, but with every disciplinary action, he creates a little more resentment. A particularly grim and historically verified episode highlights this shift. To ensure the loyalty of the Spanish tribes, Sertorius had established a school in the town of Osca, modern-day Huesca. He gathered the sons of the tribal chieftains, ostensibly to give them a fine Roman education in rhetoric and literature, and to have them wear the purple-bordered toga of Roman nobles. It was presented as a great honor, a way of integrating the Spanish elite into his new Roman state. But everyone knew what it really was. It was a hostage school. As long as the sons of the chieftains were in Sertorius's custody, their fathers would think twice about betraying him or switching their allegiance to Pompey. It was a clever, if cynical, political move, but now with loyalty wavering, the school becomes a source of immense friction. The chieftains begin to see it not as an honor, but as a prison for their children. This is the point where the historical record, particularly Plutarch's account, becomes critical of Sertorius. The man who once built bridges with the locals now seems to be creating walls. The trust he worked so hard to build is being corroded by his own heavy-handed methods. Historians still debate the necessity of these actions. Was he simply doing what any commander in his desperate situation would have to do to maintain discipline and control? Was this the pragmatic, ruthless side of his nature that had always been there, now forced into the open by the pressures of command? Or was this a sign that he was losing his political touch, becoming isolated and paranoid? For you, the change is palpable. The camp is no longer a hopeful bastion of rebellion. It feels like a pressure cooker. The air is thick with unspoken anxieties. You hear men whispering about the good old days of the war, a sure sign that the present is bleak. You look at your worn-out sandals, your patched-up tunic, and the faces of your comrades, etched with fatigue, and you can't help but wonder, what is the end game here? Are we just going to keep fighting until every last one of us is dead? The victories feel hollow now because they never lead to peace. They only lead to the next battle. The cause remains, but the spirit is beginning to die. The man who walks through the camp now is not the same man you met when you first arrived. On the surface, he is still Sertorius, the one-eyed general, the brilliant strategist. But something fundamental has shifted. The pressure has gotten to him. The easy confidence has been replaced by a flinty, guarded suspicion. The leader who once seemed to see everything now seems to see only potential threats. The boss has changed. He surrounds himself with a personal bodyguard, not just of loyal Spaniards as before, but a heavily armed, hand-picked cohort of Roman veterans. It's a subtle but clear signal. He no longer trusts everyone in his own camp. The man who once ate the same food as his soldiers now often dines alone, or only with his most trusted inner circle. The easy access that even the lowest-ranking soldier once had to him is gone. He has become remote, isolated. His temper, once famous for its steadiness, has become volatile. You see him publicly berate officers for minor tactical errors. He flies into rages over reports of slack discipline. The charisma that once drew people in is now often replaced by a harshness that pushes them away. It feels less like inspiration and more like intimidation. The White Fawn, his famous familiar, is seeing less and less. The magical pronouncements that once boosted morale have all but ceased. Perhaps the gimmick had run its course, or perhaps in his current state of mind, Sertorius no longer has the patience for such theatricalities. The magic is gone, leaving only the grim business of war. The primary target of his suspicion seems to be his Roman officers, especially the high-ranking nobles like Perperna and his circle. Sertorius, the provincial upstart, has always had a complicated relationship with the Roman aristocrats under his command. In the beginning, they needed him for their survival. But now, after years of war, their dynamic has curdled into mutual distrust. He knows they look down on his modest birth, and he suspects they are constantly judging his un-Roman methods, his reliance on Spanish barbarians, his guerrilla tactics. He starts to interpret their advice as criticism, their silence as dissent. This is a classic feedback loop of paranoia. The more isolated he becomes, the more suspicious he gets of those he has shut out. The more suspicious he is, the more he isolates himself. A crucial turning point, documented by the ancient historians, involves a conspiracy. But it's not the one you're thinking of. Not yet. A group of officers was caught plotting against him. Sertorius had them executed swiftly and brutally. This was probably a necessary act of military justice to prevent a mutiny. But the way he did it sent a shockwave of fear through the camp. There was no leniency, no second chances. It was a clear message. Disloyalty means death. But then he took a step that many, both then and now, see as a terrible mistake. In a fit of rage and perhaps paranoia, believing the conspiracy was more widespread than it was, he turned his anger on the hostage school at Osca. He accused some of the students, the sons of the Spanish chieftains, of being involved in the plot. He had several of them executed and sold others into slavery. This single act may have been his undoing. It was a catastrophic error in judgment. With one brutal command, he shattered the trust he had so carefully cultivated with his Spanish allies. The school, once a symbol of alliance, however coercive, was now the site of a massacre. The chieftains who had followed him for years, who had seen him as a protector, now saw him as a tyrant, no better than the Roman governors he claimed to be fighting against. Their loyalty, already strained, was broken. Many began to secretly negotiate with Pompeian Metellus. He had taken his greatest asset, the support of the local population, and set it on fire. Historians are still deeply divided on this particular action. Was Sertorius presented with genuine evidence of the boy's treason forcing his hand? Or was this a full-blown paranoid breakdown, a lashing out at helpless targets because he couldn't control the growing dissent among his own Roman officers? Did he sacrifice his Spanish alliance in a desperate, misguided attempt to terrorize his Roman subordinates into obedience? We will likely never know his true motivations. The sources are biased, written by men who were trying to make sense of how such a brilliant leader could fall so far. You and the other common soldiers feel the change in the atmosphere immediately. The Spanish warriors who fight alongside you are now sullen and withdrawn. The easy exchanges between the two groups cease. There's a new tension, a new distrust. You are no longer comrades in arms. You are just a Roman army occupying a hostile land. The weight on Sertorius must be unimaginable. HES fighting at a front war against Pompeian Metellus, and now he has to constantly look over his shoulder for threats from within his own camp. He is truly alone, trapped on a throne of his own making, surrounded by enemies and wavering allies. The man who was once the solution to every honest problems has now become the problem himself. And in the shadowy corners of the camp, in the tent of Marcus Perperna, this problem is being discussed with increasing urgency. They are no longer just grumbling, they are starting to talk about solutions. The evenings in camp have changed. They used to be a time for relief, for mending gear and sharing stories around a crackling fire. Now, the nights feel heavy, cloaked in suspicion. You learn to keep your head down, your opinions to yourself. But you are a Roman soldier, and you are part of the vast social machinery of the army. You attend the same functions as the officers, and it's at one of these functions, a banquet, that you first hear the whispers. It's not a grand feast. Resources are too tight for that, but it's an officer's mess. A chance for the commanders of various cohorts to dine together. Perperna is there naturally. He presides over his table with a kind of theatrical gloominess, as if hosting this dreary get-together is a great burden. Sertorius is not present. He rarely attends these general gatherings anymore. His absence creates a vacuum, and into that vacuum rushes discontent. You are standing near the edge of the large tent, perhaps on guard duty or serving wine, making you effectively invisible. The officers are drinking. The wine is rough Spanish stuff, but it's strong, and it loosens their tongues. At first, the talk is the usual soldierly complaints, the poor quality of the rations, the endless marching, the cunning of the enemy. It's all standard stuff. But then, a cavalry commander, a man named Ophidius, leans in closer to the others at Perperna's table. His voice drops, but you can still catch his words. He's lost it, he mutters, his words slightly slurred. The old man is not who he was. He trusts the barbarians more than he trusts us, his own people. Another officer, a man named Manlius, scoffs. Trust him. He just slaughtered their children. Now nobody trusts him. We're bleeding allies by the day. Pompey must be laughing himself to sleep every night. The air grows thick with treacherous consensus. These are not just grumbles anymore. This is something far more dangerous. They talk about Sertorius' paranoia, his rages. They mock his humble origin. They speak of him as an obstacle, a roadblock to their own survival. Peace. One of them says, his voice a low hiss. We could have peace. Pompey would be generous. He'd let us come home, but not while he is in charge. He'll get us all killed to protect his own pride. This is the key. The fear. They are afraid. They're trapped in a war they can no longer win. Led by a man they no longer trust. They believe that Sertorius, in his stubborn pride and paranoia, will never negotiate an honorable surrender. They see only one way out, a future without Sertorius in it. Perperna, for his part, plays the reluctant listener. He sighs deeply, shaking his head as if pained by their treasonous talk. He doesn't explicitly agree, but he doesn't stop them either. He creates a safe space for their dissent to grow, nurturing it with his silence and his sympathetic frowns. he is the soil, and they are the poisonous seeds. This type of scene, the drunken complaints turning into conspiracy, is a staple of political thrillers, but it's also a historical reality. These things rarely start with a formal meeting and a written agenda. They begin in moments like this, with shared frustrations and whispered suggestions. Alcohol acts as a social lubricant, allowing men to say what they would never dare to say sober. This raises a fascinating little point about Roman dining culture. The convivium, or banquet, was a central institution in Roman social and political life. It wasn't just about eating and drinking. It was where deals were made, alliances were forged, and reputations were built or destroyed. What you said at a banquet, who you sat next to, how much you drank, it all had meaning. But it was also a semi-private space where the strict rules of public decorum could be slightly relaxed. This made it the perfect environment for conspiracies to be born. It was a place of both performance and genuine, sometimes dangerous candor. As you stand there, trying to look as if you've heard nothing, you feel a cold knot of dread in your stomach. This is not just barracks gossip. These are high-ranking officers. These are the men who command thousands of soldiers. Their words have weight. Their dissatisfaction is an active threat. The question of who was the true ringleader of the eventual plot is something historians have never definitively settled. Was it Perperna, subtly manipulating everyone from the beginning? Or was it one of these other, more openly frustrated officers, like Aphidius, who pushed the issue while Perperna simply allowed it to happen, ready to take advantage of the outcome? The ancient sources, filtered through a pro-SC Artorian lens, point the fingers squarely at Perperna's ambition. But the psychology of a conspiracy is often more complex, a shared panic, a collective delusion where a terrible idea starts to sound like the only rational solution. The banquet breaks up. The officers stumble out into the cold night air, clapping each other on the back, their faces flushed with wine and dangerous ideas. They are no longer just discontented soldiers. They are now a nascent conspiracy. You are just a face in the crowd and nobody, but you have seen the rot starting to spread through the heart of the command. You know a storm is coming, and you suspect that many of you will not survive it. The whispers from the banquet do not fade with the morning's hangover. Instead, they solidify into a plan. A few days later, you happen to be walking past a secluded grove just outside the main camp, a place used for training exercises. You see a group of men gathered there. It's Perperna, and with him are the same officers from the banquet, Aphidius, Manlius, and a few others. This is not a casual meeting. Their posture is tense, their faces grim. They have moved from drunken complaints to sober plotting. This is the first official meeting of the conspiracy. You duck behind a cluster of cork trees, your heart pounding. You know you should not be here, that what you are witnessing could get you killed. But you are frozen in place, a secret observer to a turning point in history. Perperna is speaking, his voice low but firm. He has dropped the mask of the reluctant listener. He is now the active leader of this faction. It cannot go on, he says. Every day he remains in command. We lose more allies, more ground. Pompey and Metellus are squeezing us. The men are losing heart. His tyranny will be the death of us all. He frames the argument in terms of necessity of survival. This isn't about his personal ambition, he implies. This is about saving the army from a commander who has lost his mind. He is painting a potential assassination as a painful but necessary act of self-preservation. It's a classic justification for a coup. The other officers murmur in agreement. They are already convinced. The question is no longer if they should act, but how. A direct confrontation is impossible, says Manlius. He's too well guarded. The guard is loyal to him, and the Spaniards still worship him. If we challenge him openly, we will be the ones torn to pieces. They need a way to get to him when he is vulnerable, when his guard is down. The conversation turns to methods, to opportunities. A hunting accident, a stray arrow in a skirmish. These ideas are dismissed as too unreliable, too likely to fail or be discovered. They need certainty. They need a moment when they can surround him with no escape. This is where the true, cold-blood nature of the plot begins to take shape. The setting they choose is the one that has already served as the incubator for their treason banquet. It's the perfect venue. It's a place of celebration and relaxation. It would allow them to gather around Sertorius in an non-Thracian context with their weapons close at hand but concealed. This detail, preserved by Plutarch, is a chilling insight into Roman elite culture. The banquet, a symbol of civilization, trust, and friendship, was to be twisted into an execution chamber. It's a betrayal of the highest social order. As they discuss the plan, you see the different personalities at play. Aphidius, the cavalry commander, is loud and boastful, eager for action. Others are more hesitant, their faces pale with the enormity of what they are planning. They are plotting to kill their commander, a man who is a living legend, a man who saved all of their lives. The crime they are contemplating is immense, not just a murder but a form of parricide, the killing of a father figure. And what about Perperna? What did he truly hope to gain? This is a point of contention for historians. The most obvious answer is power. With Sertorius gone, Perperna, as the next most senior Roman noble, would naturally assume command of the army. He likely believed that he could then negotiate a favorable peace with Pompey, saving his own skin and the lives of his fellow aristocrats, and perhaps even returning to Rome with some measure of his status restored. He probably imagined himself as the hero who ended a pointless war. A less charitable, but perhaps more accurate, view is that he was simply delusional. He was a mediocre general, a fact he seemed incapable of recognizing. Did he truly believe he could command the loyalty of Sertorius' hardened veterans and fierce Spanish allies? Did he think he could out General Pompey, a man who had been consistently humiliated by Sertorius? His ambition was completely untethered from his actual ability. He saw the throne, but he couldn't see the abyss just beyond it. The meeting breaks up. The men disperse one by one, trying to look casual as if they were just discussing the weather. You remain hidden for a long time, your mind reeling. You have just become a silent party to a plot to assassinate Quintus Sertorius. You are faced with an impossible choice. Do you warn him? But how? You are a common soldier. Who would believe you? The officers you would have to accuse are your own commanders. They would deny everything and have you flogged for slander, or worse. And what if Sertorius himself is too paranoid to listen, suspecting a trick? Do you keep silent? That makes you a tacit accomplice. Your silence will be paid for with your general's blood. You are trapped. You are a powerless observer, watching the gears of a terrible machine begin to turn, knowing they will grind your leader to dust. The conspiracy is no longer just whispers. It is a plan. It has a venue. All it needs now is an opportunity. The conspirators now have a plan, but they need a pretext. They can't just throw a random party and expect Sertorius to attend. His suspicions are too high, and he has been avoiding social gatherings. They need a reason, a lure so compelling that he would have no choice but to celebrate. They need to manufacture a victory. The plot they hatch is devious and multi-layered. It's a masterpiece of deception designed to play on Sertorius' own tactical mindset. The core of the plan involves a man named Antonius, one of the conspirators, and a forged letter. First, they need to create a battlefield success that can be directly attributed to one of their own. Perperna, using his authority as second-in-command, dispatches several units under the command of other conspirators to engage a detachment of Pompey's forces. They intentionally choose a weaker target, ensuring a high probability of success. They throw a disproportionate amount of force at it, not to win a strategic victory, but simply to produce a win they can publicize. They succeed. A Roman outpost is overrun, some supplies are captured, and a number of the enemy are killed. It's a minor skirmish, but it can be dressed up to look like a significant triumph. With the victory secured, the second phase of the plan begins. They need to deliver this news to Sertorius in the most dramatic and believable way possible. This is where the forged letter comes in. You see a messenger ride into camp, his horse lathered in sweat, his face a mask of urgent excitement. He is not just any messenger, he is one of Perperna's most trusted men, chosen for his acting ability. He makes a great show of pushing through the crowds, demanding to see the general, claiming he has news of the utmost importance. He is carrying a sealed dispatch. The messenger is brought before Sertorius. You are not in the command tent, but the story of what happens next spreads through the camp like fire. The messenger presents the letter. It's not from the commanders in the field. It's supposedly a captured letter, taken from a slain Pompeian officer. This is a brilliant piece of psychological manipulation. A report from one of his own officers could be questioned or downplayed, but a captured enemy dispatch feels like raw, unfiltered intelligence. It's a peek behind the enemy's curtain, something Sertorius, the master of information, would find irresistible. The letter is a work of art. It's written on authentic Roman military papers, perhaps taken from a previous skirmish. The handwriting mimics that of a known Pompeian staff officer. The seals are carefully faked. The content is crafted to be exactly what Sertorius would want to hear, but with enough detail to seem genuine. It describes the crushing defeat of the Pompeian outpost, but it also contains fake intelligence about Pompey's supposed response. It might mention troop movements that are now in disarray, a collapse in morale, or Pompey himself being furious at the incompetence of his subordinates. It paints a picture of an enemy in chaos, all thanks to the recent victory won by Purper NAS men. This is a fascinating little tidbit about ancient espionage. Forgery was a high art. Without modern forensic techniques, a well-made forgery was almost impossible to detect. A skilled forger had to be a master of handwriting, ink composition, papyr's aging, and the specific bureaucratic language and formulas used in official documents. The conspirators likely had such a man in their ranks, perhaps a disgruntled military scribe. Sertorius reads the letter. For the first time in months, the hard, suspicious mask on his face cracks. He sees what he wants to see. A significant victory, validation that his forces are still superior, and a sign that the tide might be turning back in his favor. His paranoia has been focused inward on his own men. The idea that his men would fabricate a victory and then create an elaborate forgery to report it is so audacious, so outside the box, that it likely never even occurs to him. They have used his own love of intelligence gathering against him. The academic world still picks apart this moment. How could a man so famously cunning and suspicious be so easily fooled? Some argue that this is the ultimate proof of his degraded mental state. His judgment was so clouded by stress and paranoia that he lost his critical faculties. Others suggest a more human explanation. He was exhausted. He was worn down by the endless pressure, and he was desperate for good news. The forged letter was a lifeline, and he grabbed it without examining it too closely because he needed it to be true. He was a victim of his own hope. The conspirators have their lure. The news of the great victory is announced to the army. The mood in the camp instantly lifts. For a moment, the gloom and fatigue are forgotten. There is a reason to celebrate. The plotters, led by Perperna, now have the perfect excuse. They can approach Sertorius and insist that such a triumph must be honored with a magnificent banquet. It would be an insult to the brave soldiers not to. How could he possibly refuse? The good news, fabricated though it is, breathes life back into the camp. For the first time in a long time, there is a genuine buzz of excitement. Soldiers who had been sullen and withdrawn now clap each other on the back. The victory is exaggerated with each telling, growing from a minor skirmish into a legendary rout of Pompey's legions. The forged letter has done its work not just on Sertorius, but on the entire army. It has manufactured a moment of collective happiness. You watch Sertorius as he moves through the camp in the hours after receiving the news. The change in him is remarkable. It's like watching a storm cloud pass, revealing the sun. The hard lines of stress around his single eye seem to soften. He walks with a lighter step. He even stops to share a joke with a group of legionaries, something you haven't seen him do in months. It's a glimpse of the old Sertorius, the charismatic leader who had first won your loyalty. He is visibly relieved. The weight of the world, which he has been carrying on his shoulders, seems to have lifted, if only for a moment. He accepts the congratulations of his officers, including the conspirators, with genuine gratitude. He praises the commanders who lead the successful attack, unwittingly praising the very men who are about to murder him. He is basking in a false dawn, and it is both tragic and deeply unsettling to witness. He spends time with his inner circle, discussing the strategic implications of this new development. He is back in his element, the master tactician, planning his next move based on the faulty intelligence from the forged letter. He is moving pieces on a chessboard, not realizing that the board itself is a trap. This period, The day or two between the arrival of the false news and the fatal banquet represents the last peaceful moments of his life. He is surrounded by his enemies, but he doesn't know it. He believes for a brief, shining moment that his fortunes are turning, that his long and brutal struggle might yet be won. During this time, you might see him consulting with the Spanish chieftains who remain loyal to him. He uses the news to try and mend the bridges he had burned. He presents the victory as proof that their alliance is still strong, that they can still defeat the Romans from Rome. Some of them are convinced, their spirits lifted by the news. Others remain watchful, their trust not so easily regained. One of the most poignant details from the ancient sources, particularly Plutarch, is that Sertorius was known to be a man who, despite the hardness of war, enjoyed the pleasures of peace. He appreciated good conversation, fine wine, and intellectual company. He had established the school at Osk not just as a cynical political tool, but also because he genuinely valued Roman education and culture. The prospect of a victory banquet, a return to a semblance of civilized Roman life, likely appealed to him on a personal level. It was a chance to put aside the grimness of command and be for one evening, a Roman nobleman celebrating a victory with his peers. This is a point of psychological speculation among historians, but it's a compelling one. Was Sertorius' acceptance of the banquet invitation a sign of his naivete, or was it a sign of his exhaustion? Perhaps he was simply tired of being the suspicious, isolated tyrant. Perhaps he consciously chose to let his guard down, to trust his men again because the alternative, a life of perpetual, lonely vigilance, was just too bleak to bear. He may have walked into the trap not because he failed to see it, but because he was too weary to avoid it. It's a bait with no answer. Was his downfall a failure of intellect or a failure of spirit? You see the preparations for the feast beginning. Casks of wine, better wine than usual, specially procured, are rolled into the main officers' mess tent. Cooks are tasked with preparing the best meal they can muster from the camp's resources. There is an air of festivity, but if you look closely, you can see the tension in the faces of Perperna, of Phidias, and the others. They are playing the part of cheerful hosts, but their eyes are watchful, their smiles a little too tight. They are like actors preparing for the most difficult performance of their lives. Sertorius himself seems oblivious. He is a man enjoying a moment of respite. He has spent years fighting, running, and scheming. He has carried the hopes and lives of thousands on his one good eye. He has been betrayed by his country, hunted by its best generals, and undermined by his own allies. For one afternoon, he allows himself to believe in good news. He allows himself to look forward to a night of celebration. He is a great man on the edge of an abyss, admiring the view, completely unaware of the ground crumbling beneath his feet. The last peaceful moments are always the most heartbreaking. The invitation arrives. It's not a formal written thing. It's delivered in person. Perperna, accompanied by a few of the other senior officers who are in on the plot, approaches Sertorius. They are all smiles, their faces radiating a carefully rehearsed bonhomie. You see the exchange from a distance. Perperna acts as the spokesman. His tone is respectful, even deferential. He speaks of the great victory, a triumph that has lifted the spirits of the entire army. He says that the men, particularly the officers who lead the charge, feel that such a momentous event cannot pass without proper recognition. It demands a celebration, a banquet worthy of the name. It would be an honor, he says, if Sertorius would preside over the feast. It would mean the world to the soldiers to celebrate with their commander, the architect of their success. It is a perfectly crafted request. It's framed not as a personal invitation from Perperna, but as a collective desire of the army. To refuse would seem churlish, an insult to the brave men who fought and won. It would make Sertorius look ungrateful and aloof, confirming the very whispers of his growing distance from his own soldiers. They have made it socially and politically impossible for him to say no. Sertorius hesitates for only a moment, perhaps a flicker of his old suspicion, a gut feeling that something is not quite right. But he looks at the smiling faces of his officers, he hears the distant cheers from the soldiers' quarters, and he remembers the glowing words of the captured letter. The desire for celebration, the need for a moment of normalcy wins out. He agrees to attend. The conspirators have their confirmation. The trap is now officially set. The chosen location is the Praetorium, the large tent that serves as the command headquarters and primary officer's mess. It's the most logical place for such an event, the symbolic center of the camp. But for the plotters, it offers several key advantages. It's a space they control. They can manage who enters and who doesn't. They can station their own loyal men as guards of honor at the entrances, ensuring that Sertorius's personal bodyguard can be politely but firmly kept outside. The planning for the banquet itself becomes a kind of grim, meticulous stage management. Every detail is considered. The seating arrangement is crucial. Sertorius will be given the seat of honor, as custom dictates, but Properna will seat himself on one side of him, and another key conspirator, Antonius, on the other. They will literally surround him, hemming him in, cutting off any easy escape route. The other plotters will be strategically placed at the same table, close enough to act in an instant. This small detail about the seating arrangement is a fascinating cultural insight. In a Roman dining setting, where you sat was a direct reflection of your status. The host would carefully arrange his guests to honor them, but also to facilitate conversation and political maneuvering. The conspirators use this tradition as a weapon. Their seating chart is not a social map, it's a tactical deployment. Even the menu is part of the plot. They arrange for lavish food and, most importantly, an abundance of wine. They want Sertorius and, crucially, any officers present who are not part of the conspiracy to be relaxed, drunk, and happy. A drunk man is a slow man. A celebratory atmosphere dulls the senses and lowers suspicion. And then there's the question of weapons. It was not customary for Roman officers to wear swords or armor at a formal banquet. To do so would be a major breach of etiquette, a sign of profound distrust. It would be like wearing a tactical vest to a dinner party today. The conspirators know this. They will come unarmed, or at least, they would appear to be. Their daggers will be concealed in the folds of their togas or hidden nearby, perhaps under the cushions of the dining couches. They will rely on the element of surprise. The historical debate here centers on the atmosphere leading up to the event. Did no one else in the camp suspect anything? Sertorius had many loyal followers, both Roman and Spanish. Was the conspiracy so tight-knit that not a single rumor leaked out? Some historians find this hard to believe, suggesting that perhaps others did have their suspicions but were too afraid to voice them. The swift execution of the previous plotters had created a climate of fear. It's possible that people saw the signs but chose self-preservation over loyalty. Others argue that the conspirators' deception was simply that good. The victory had created such a convincing wave of euphoria that it drowned out any stray doubts. Why would anyone plot a murder in the midst of a celebration? The timing was, in its own twisted way, a form of camouflage. So the invitation is accepted, the venue is prepared, and the plan is in motion. The entire camp is looking forward to a party. They believe they are celebrating a victory over Pompey. They do not know that they are actually witnessing the final, elaborate preparations for the murder of their own leader. The invitation to the banquet is not just a piece of social custom. It is a death warrant. The evening of the banquet arrives. The air is cool, but the main Praetorium tent glows with the warm light of oil lamps, a beacon of celebration in the dark camp. As you approach, you can hear the sounds of laughter and music from within. On the surface, everything appears festive and normal, but a strange, tense energy hums just beneath the surface. You are not one of the invited guests dining on the couches, of course, but perhaps you are one of the servers, tasked with pouring wine, or maybe a guard stationed just inside the entrance, ordered to stand watch and observe. This position gives you a privileged and terrifying view of the entire scene. The conspirators are already there, playing the part of gracious hosts. Properna is at the center of it all, welcoming guests, a fixed smile plastered on his face. He is more animated than you have ever seen him. But his eyes dart around the room, checking positions, making sure everything is in place. It's the jittery, high-strung energy of a man on the verge of committing an irrevocable act. Then Sertorius enters. A hush falls over the assembly for a moment, a show of respect, before they erupt into cheers and applause. He is not wearing armor, just a fine, clean toga. He looks relaxed, the burdens of command momentarily set aside. He smiles, acknowledging the cheers, and takes his designated place on the main dining couch, the seat of honor. Perperna settles in on one side of him, Antonius on the other. Just as they planned, the banquet begins. The food is brought out, roasted meats, bread, olives, fruits, a feast by the standards of a military camp. The wine flows freely. The conspirators make a great show of encouraging everyone to drink. They toast to victory. One of them shouts. They toast to Sertorius, another echoes. The cups are filled and refilled. Sertorius, for his part, seems to be enjoying himself. He engages in conversation. He partakes of the food and wine. However, the ancient historians like Plutarch make a specific note of his behavior. Sertorius was known to be a moderate drinker and disliked boorish or vulgar behavior at dinner parties. As the evening wears on and the conspirators in their nervousness become louder, cruder, and more obviously drunk, a look of distaste crosses Sertorius' face. This is a key psychological moment. The plotters, in their attempt to create a relaxed atmosphere, are overcating. Their jokes are too loud, their laughter too forced. They begin to tell lewd stories and engage in mock arguments, trying to create a smokescreen of chaos and drunken revelry. But their behavior is so out of character, so un-Roman in its lack of decorum, that it begins to annoy their guest of honor. Sertorius, irritated by the vulgarity, turns away from them. He leans back on his couch, trying to ignore the contrived commotion, then faces the other direction. He effectively turns his back on his would-be assassins. This small act of social disapproval, a silent rebuke for their bad manners, ironically gives the conspirators the perfect opportunity. Sertorius is now distracted, his attention elsewhere. He is disgusted, not suspicious. You watch this scene unfold, your stomach twisting into a knot. You see the fake smiles and the empty cheers. You can feel the disconnect between the celebratory noise and the cold, murderous intent that fills the tent. It's a room full of men wearing masks. The conspirators are masking their treason with forced merriment. The other guests are masking their own anxieties about the war with drunken enthusiasm. And Sertorius, the guest of honor, is masking his irritation with a veneer of polite detachment. This scene highlights a subtle, often overlooked aspect of Roman social dynamics, the power of etiquette. The rules of a proper convivium were deeply ingrained in a Roman aristocrat. The conspirators' deliberate violation of these rules was a gamble. They hoped it would be seen as harmless, drunken fun. For Sertorius, it was simply offensive. His reaction wasn't fear. It was annoyance. He didn't sense danger, he sensed a breach of protocol. The historical debate here was subtle but fascinating. Did Sertorius' inherent Roman snobbery and his distaste for undignified behavior make him blind to the real threat? Or was the performance of the conspirators simply that convincing? As a server, you approach the main couch to refill a wine cup. You see Perperna's face up close. It's pale and sweaty, despite the cool night air. His smile is a ghastly rictus. He avoids making eye contact. Antonius, on the other side of Sertorius, keeps shifting his weight, his hands straying near the folds of his toga where his dagger must be hidden. They are coiled springs, wound tight with terror and anticipation. The noise in the tent reaches a crescendo. The music is loud. The drunken shouts are boisterous. It's the perfect cover. The moment is approaching. The entire banquet, the food, the wine, the music, has all been leading to this. It has all been stagecraft, designed to lull the victim and provide cover for the crime. You look at Sertorius, leaning back on his couch oblivious, and you know that any second now, the performance will end, and the killing will begin. The signal. Every conspiracy, every ambush needs a signal. It's the moment that transforms thought into action. The point of no return. The conspirators had agreed upon one beforehand. It needed to be something that seemed like an accident, an action that wouldn't raise alarm but would be unmistakable to those in the know. They chose an act of theatrical clumsiness. Perperna is the one to give it. He is holding a heavy silver cup filled with wine. He raises it, perhaps as if to offer yet another toast. His hand slips. The cup, heavy and full, drops from his grasp. It hits the floor with a loud, metallic clatter that cuts through the din of the party for just a fraction of a second. For most people in the tent, it's nothing, just a drunken officer dropping his drink. They might chuckle or jeer good-naturedly. But for the dozen or so men who are part of the plot, that sound is a gunshot in a quiet room. It's the starting pistol. It's the signal to kill. Sertorius, annoyed by the commotion on his other side, is still leaning back on his couch. He hears the cup fall, perhaps out of instinct, or simply to see what the latest oafish disruption is. He shifts his weight and turns his head towards Perperna. He starts to lean forward, maybe to help pick it up, or maybe just to get a better look. That movement, that slight shift forward, exposes his back and neck. This moment, the dropping of the cup, is a small but brilliant piece of historical detail recorded by the ancient sources. It's so mundane, so domestic, that it makes the horror of what follows even more stark. It's a classic banality of evil moment. The signal for a great man's murder isn't a trumpet blast or a war cry, it's the sound of spilled wine. As Sertorius leans forward, the conspirator sitting next to him, Antonius, makes his move. He doesn't hesitate. He rises up from the dining couch, pulling a dagger from beneath his toga. He strikes downward a swift, brutal stab into Sertorius' exposed back. The first blow is not fatal, but it is a shot. A sharp, searing pain. Sertorius grunts, a sound of surprise more than agony. His one good eye goes wide, not with fear, but with sudden, stark realization. The vulgarity, the noise, the dropped cup, it all clicks into place in a single, horrifying instant. He understands. He has been betrayed. His reaction is that of a soldier. He doesn't freeze. He tries to fight back. Even with a dagger in his back, he attempts to rise to defend himself. He is 55 years old, but he is still strong, a veteran of 100 battles. He shoves Antonius away and tries to get to his feet. But it's too late. The dropped cup was a signal for everyone. The other conspirators who were seated at the table are already on their feet. They swarm him. They are a pack of wolves, descending on a wounded lion. Manlius, Aphidius, and the others, they all draw their concealed daggers. They fall upon him, a flurry of desperate, frantic blows. This is a point where the historical accounts become a little muddled, as eyewitness accounts of such chaotic events often are. Did Perperna himself strike a blow? Some sources say he hung back, letting the others do the bloody work. Others imply he joined in. This debate among historians is, in a way, a trial of Perperna's character. Was he a cowardly mastermind who orchestrated the murder, but was too squeamish to participate? Or was he fully committed, his own dagger stained with his commander's blood? We will never know for sure. What is certain is that Sertorius, for a few terrifying seconds, fought back with the last of his strength. He was on the floor, entangled in the banquet table, trying to fend off multiple attackers. It was not a clean, swift assassination. It was a messy, desperate, ugly struggle. It was a brawl. You, standing by the entrance, are frozen in horror. The laughter and music have been replaced by shouts, the thud of blows, and the grunts of a dying man. The guests who were not in on the plot stare in stunned disbelief. They are too drunk, too shocked to intervene. They simply watch as their commander is butchered by his own officers, not 10 feet away from them. The festive banquet tent has transformed into a squalid abattoir. The smell of spilled wine now mixes with the metallic, coppery scent of blood. The signal has been given, and the deed is being done. The point of no return is being crossed. The moment between the signal and the first blow is a breath held too long. The space between the dropped cup and the drawn dagger contains the death of a dream. As Sertorius leans forward, distracted by Perperna's feigned clumsiness, he is perfectly positioned. He is a problem to be solved, and the solution is a blade. Antonius strikes. The dagger, a short, vicious Roman pugile, flashes in the lamplight. It plunges into Sertorius's back. There is a sickening, wet thud that seems to absorb all other sound in the tent. For you, watching from the edge of the scene, time seems to warp. The boisterous laughter of a moment ago feels like it happened in another lifetime. The space of this betrayal is horribly, intimately close. This is not a battlefield death from a distant spear. This is happening on a dining couch, a piece of furniture meant for relaxation and fellowship. The murder weapon is produced from the very folds of the toga that signify Roman citizenship and status. The act is a perversion of everything the setting is supposed to represent. It's a dagger produced between the bread and the wine. Sertrius' reaction is pure instinct. He is a warrior to his last breath. He roars, a sound of rage and agony, and tries to surge to his feet. For a heart-stopping second, it looks like he might succeed. He is a powerful man, and the adrenaline of betrayal fuels a final, desperate burst of strength. He throws his weight back, knocking Antonius off balance. His one good eye, now wide with the terrible clarity of understanding, fixes on his assassins. There is no fear in that eye, only a burning, contemptuous fury. But the conspiracy was not built around a single assassin. It was designed for this very moment. The other plotters, a semicircle of death around the dining couch, do not wait. They are committed. They fall on him like a single organism. Aphidius, Manlius, all the men from the secret meetings and the drunken whispers. They draw their own hidden daggers and close in. It's a chaotic, clumsy, and brutal scrum. There is no elegance here. No single fatal thrust. It's a frenzy of stabbing. They are grabbing his limbs, holding him down. Sertrius is fighting back, thrashing, trying to gain purchase on the floor, which is slick with spilled wine. He is an old lion being brought down by a pack of hyenas. This scene, as described by the historians, is grimly reminiscent of another, more famous assassination that would take place in Rome less than 30 years later, the murder of Julius Caesar. Both were great, charismatic commanders who blurred the lines of republican tradition. Both were seen as tyrants by a circle of their own aristocratic subordinates. Both were killed in a place of supposed civic peace, the Senate House for Caesar, a banquet for Sertrius. And both were swarmed and stabbed to death by multiple assassins, a collective act designed to cheer the guilt. This similarity has led some historians to wonder if the assassins of Caesar looked to the murder of Sertrius as a kind of grim precedent. Was this a known playbook for eliminating a leader who had grown too powerful? The idea of a conspiracy of daggers as a recurring Roman political tool is a chilling one. You are watching the man die. The abstract concept of assassination becomes a physical reality of flailing limbs, grunting effort, and the dark, blossoming stains on a white toga. The other guests, the ones not in on the plot, are paralyzed. They are trapped in a nightmare. Some scream. Others are frozen in a drunken, horrified silence. They see their commanders, men they have followed and fought alongside, murdering their supreme commander. The entire structure of their world is collapsing in front of their eyes. Perperna, the architect of this horror, stands back from the immediate fray. His face is a pale, sweaty mask of terror and exultation. He has done it. He has removed the obstacle. He is watching his ambition being realized through the bloody work of others. He is the director observing the final, terrible scene of his play. The struggle on the floor lasts for only a few moments, but it feels like an eternity. Finally, Sertrius' movements cease. His body goes limp. The furious energy that had defined him his entire life is extinguished. He lies still on the floor of the praetorium, amidst the debris of a feast, his body pierced by a dozen daggers. The one-eyed general, the ghost who haunted Pompey, the last great Marian, is dead. The daggers have done what the combined legions of Rome could not. The space between the dagger and the bread has been fatally closed. The moment Sertrius' body lies still, the frantic energy of the assassins evaporates, leaving a vacuum of pure, ringing shock. The scrum of killers stumbles back, their chests heaving, their hands and togas spattered with blood. They stare down at what they have done, their faces a mixture of horror, disbelief, and dawning panic. The deed is done. The lion is dead. Now what? The tent, which moments before was a scene of frenzied violence, is now plunged into a surreal, dead silence. The only sounds are the ragged breathing of the killers and the soft, whimpering sobs of one of the younger officers, who was not part of the plot, now curled up on his dining couch in a state of shock. The festive lamps now cast long, dancing shadows that make the scene look even more grotesque. The smell of blood is thick and suffocating. This is the immediate, unplanned aftermath. The conspirators had a plan to kill, but they seem to have had a much less coherent plan for what to do in the seconds after the killing. They look at each other, their eyes wide, searching for a leader. All eyes turn to Perperna. Perperna, who had hung back from the actual stabbing, now steps forward. His face is ashen, but he forces himself to take control. He knows this is the most dangerous moment. The murder itself was just the first step. Securing power is the next, and it is far from guaranteed. The tent is full of witnesses, and just outside are thousands of soldiers, including Surgery SS' fiercely loyal personal bodyguard and the Spanish auxiliary troops who worshipped him as a near deity. If they learn the truth of what happened here, the conspirators will be torn limb from limb. The scene transforms from a murder into a cover-up. The first, most immediate problem is the other guests in the tent, the officers who were not part of the conspiracy. They are witnesses. They saw everything. Aphidius, the brutish cavalry commander, draws his bloody dagger and takes a step towards one of the horrified officers, a man named Fabius. "You are with us, or you are with a dead man?" Aphidius snarls, his voice shaking. It's a crude but effective threat. The non-conspirators, terrified and outnumbered, quickly realize they have no choice. They stammer their assent, their eyes wide with fear. They have been instantly conscripted into the conspiracy by virtue of their presence. Their silence has been bought with a threat to their lives. This small, brutal interaction, though not explicitly detailed in every ancient source, is a logical necessity of the moment. The conspirators could not afford to have dissenting voices. This is a common feature of coups and assassinations throughout history, the immediate coercion and absorption of bystanders. You are either with the new power, or you are an enemy to be eliminated. Now, for the body, they can't just leave it there. They need to control the narrative, and that starts with controlling the crime scene. Perperna issues a hushed order. A few of the junior conspirators grab a heavy woolen blanket from one of the dining couches and unceremoniously drape it over Sertorius' body. They try to sop up the pooling blood with discarded napkins. It's a pathetic, desperate attempt to erase the evidence of their butchery. The historical accounts of this moment are sparse, but the chaos is palpable even between the lines. Imagine the sheer panic. These men are soldiers, not professional assassins used to cleaning up after a crime. They are clumsy. They are terrified. They are operating on pure adrenaline. The most difficult part is yet to come, facing the army. Perperna knows he cannot keep the murder a secret for long. He needs to seize the initiative and announce Sertorius' death on his own terms. He gathers the conspirators around him, their faces still smeared with sweat and some with blood. He gives them their story. It must be simple, believable, and delivered with conviction. Their story, as you will soon hear it proclaimed to the rest of the camp, is that a great tragedy has occurred. Their beloved commander has been struck down, not by his own men, but by a treacherous enemy, his spy, an assassin sent by Pompey who had infiltrated the banquet in disguise. It's a flimsy story, one that would likely not hold up to any serious scrutiny, but in the immediate chaos and confusion, it might be enough. It redirects the army as anchor from the conspirators to the external enemy role. It casts Perperna not as a murderer, but as the loyal second-in-command, forced to step up and take control in a moment of crisis. As the conspirators prepare to leave the tent and face the army, a new sound begins to filter in from outside. It's the voice of Sertorius' bodyguard, growing concerned. They were stationed at the entrance and must have heard the commotion. They are demanding to know what is happening. Their shouts are growing louder, more insistent. The clock is ticking. The chaotic, bloody privacy of the assassination is over. The public reckoning is about to begin. Perperna takes a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. He wipes the sweat from his brow, arranges his face into a mask of solemn grief, and steps out of the praetorium into the night air. He is met immediately by the anxious faces of Sertorius' bodyguard. "What was that noise?" their captain demands. "Where is the general?" Behind Perperna, the other conspirators emerge from the tent. Their own face is a clumsy mixture of feigned sadness and genuine terror. They block the entrance, preventing anyone from looking inside at the scene of carnage. Perperna raises a hand for silence. His voice, when he speaks, is filled with a carefully rehearsed anguish. "A tragedy," he cries, his voice breaking. "A monstrous, cowardly act of treason." A murmur of confusion and alarm ripples through the assembled soldiers. "Our commander, our beloved Sertorius, is dead." A collective gasp, disbelief, a growing roar of anger and grief. The news hits the soldiers like a physical blow. How? Someone shouts from the crowd. Who did this? This is the crucial moment. This is where the lie must be sold. Perperna's face hardens with manufactured rage. An assassin, he proclaims, his voice ringing out across the camp as more soldiers, drawn by the commotion, hurry to the scene. They were sent by Pompey. He infiltrated our celebration, a coward hiding among us, and struck down our leader when his back was turned. He points a trembling finger back at the tent. We killed the fiend, but it was too late. Our general is gone. The lie is audacious. It's simple, it's visceral, and it points the finger of blame at an enemy they already hate. For the common soldiers, reeling from the shock and desperate for an explanation, it's a plausible, if horrifying, story. The idea of their invincible general being killed by one of his own men is almost unthinkable. A secretus assassin from the enemy camp makes more sense. It preserves the illusion of their own unity. The grief of the soldiers is real and profound. You see hardened veterans, men who have faced death without flinching, openly weeping. Their loyalty to Sertorius was personal. He was more than a general. He was their protector, their father figure, the sole reason for their long struggle. His death is not just a strategic loss, it's the death of their hope. The Spanish auxiliaries react with even greater intensity. Their mourning is a wild, keening lament. They saw Sertorius not just as a Roman ally, but as a great chieftain, a man touched by the gods. In their culture, the death of such a leader was a cataclysm. According to the ancient writers, many of his closest Spanish guards, in a tradition of warrior loyalty known as devotee ioi burka, took their own lives, believing it was their sacred duty to follow their chief into the afterlife. This dramatic, tragic act, while demonstrating their incredible loyalty to Sertorius, also conveniently removed potential witnesses who were closest to him and might have questioned the official story. This tradition of devotee io is a fascinating and somewhat debated piece of history. Was it a genuine, deeply ingrained cultural practice where a warrior's life was sworn to his leader? Or was it exaggerated by Roman writers to emphasize the barbaric but noble loyalty of the Spaniards? Most historians believe it was a real, if extreme, form of military oath, where a warrior's honor was so completely tied to his leader's life that he could not live on after his master's death, especially if that death was seen as shameful. In the midst of this chaos and grief, Perperna makes his move. He allows the army a short time to mourn, then he calls the officers together. With Sertorius dead, he is now by rank and seniority the commander. He delivers a rousing speech. He speaks of vengeance. He vows to hunt down Pompey and make him pay for his cowardly act. He tells the soldiers that the best way to honor Sertorius's memory is to fight on, to complete the mission he started. We will finish what he began, he roars. For Sertorius, some of the soldiers, fired up by grief and a desire for revenge, cheer him on, but many others, especially the senior centurions and the Roman veterans who had been with Sertorius from the beginning, are silent. They look at Perperna, their eyes narrowed with suspicion. The story of the lone assassin feels thin, too convenient. They look at the faces of the other officers who were at the banquet, and they see fear and guilt, not just grief. The lie has been told, and for now it is holding, but it's a fragile thing. The army is in a state of shock, and in their confusion, they are willing to accept Perperna's leadership. But the seeds of doubt have already been planted. They have a new commander, but they have lost their soul. Perperna has the title, the standards, the legions, but he does not have their hearts. He has inherited an army, but he has not inherited the loyalty that held it together. The great SC Artorian rebellion is now just a ghost, a hollow shell commanded by the very man who destroyed its spirit. The days following the assassination are a masterclass in just how essential one man had been to the entire rebellion. Perperna, the new boss, steps into Sertorius' annals, and he quickly discovers they are many, many sizes too big. The title of commander is one thing, the ability to command is another entirely. His first challenge is the army itself. He has the formal allegiance of the Roman officers, many of whom were either part of his conspiracy or too scared to oppose him. But the rank-and-file soldiers, the hardened veterans who formed the backbone of the army, are a different story. Their loyalty was to Sertorius, the man. They respected his genius, They were inspired by his courage, and they trusted his judgment. They have none of that for Perperna. You can feel the change in the camp's atmosphere. The disciplined hum of a confident army is gone, replaced by a sullen, resentful silence. The soldiers obey Perperna's orders, but they do so grudgingly, without enthusiasm. They look at him with a mixture of contempt and suspicion. The story of the lone assassin is already starting to unravel. Too many people were in that tent. Too many officers are acting strangely. Whispers turn into rumors, and rumors start to sound like the truth. The soldiers may not know the exact details, but they feel it in their bones. Their leader was murdered by his own. Perperna tries to imitate Sertrius, but he fails miserably. Where Sertrius was charismatic, Perperna is arrogant. Where Sertrius was a brilliant strategist, Perperna is a clumsy tactician. He tries to win the soldiers over with promises of bigger pay and more plunder, but he comes across as desperate and transcational. He lacks the common touch, the personal connection that Sertrius had effortlessly cultivated. He is a nobleman trying to lead a populist army, and the two just don't mix. His biggest problem, however, is his complete and utter incompetence on the battlefield. Sertrius' genius was in his mastery of guerrilla warfare, the quick strikes, the clever feints, the deep understanding of the terrain. Perperna has no feel for this kind of fighting. He is a conventional Roman general, trained for conventional battles, and he is a poor one at that. He attempts to lead the army in a campaign against Pompey, perhaps hoping a quick victory will solidify his authority. The result is a disaster. His plans are predictable. His movements are slow. He leads his troops into obvious traps that Sertrius would have spotted from a mile away. Small, previously successful skirmishes turn into humiliating defeats. The army that had run rings around Pompey and Tellus for years is now being systematically dismantled. This highlights a fascinating little detail about military leadership. It's not just about knowing tactics from a scroll. Sertrius had what military theorists call coup d'oeil, a French term meaning stroke of the eye. It's the intuitive ability to instantly grasp the tactical situation on a battlefield to see opportunities and dangers that others miss. It's an unteachable, almost artistic talent. Sertrius had it in spades. Perperna had none of it. The Spanish allies, who were already alienated by Sertrius' execution of their sons, now abandoned the cause in droves. They had allied themselves with a winner, a man they respected. They feel no loyalty whatsoever to the sour-faced, incompetent Roman aristocrat who has taken his place. They simply pack up their things and go home. Or worse, they switch sides and offer their services to Pompey, showing him the secret mountain passes and hidden supply caches they had once shared with Sertrius. The rebellion is not just losing battles, it's hemorrhaging its most vital intelligence and manpower. The historical debate here isn't about whether Perperna was a bad general. The consensus is that he was awful. The debate is about his self-awareness. Did he know he was in over his head? Or was he so blinded by his own arrogance and ambition that he genuinely believed he was a capable commander, and that the army's failures were the fault of his disloyal soldiers? The ancient sources paint him as a man completely lacking in introspection, blaming everyone but himself for the catastrophe he had created. You are now part of a losing army. The swagger is gone. The confidence is shattered. Morale has hit rock bottom. You are hungry. You are tired. And you are being led by a fool. Every skirmish is a gamble. Every march feels like a retreat. The men talk openly around the campfires about the betrayal, the whispers now loud and defiant. Perperna has lost control of the narrative and is rapidly losing control of the army. He has inherited a finely tuned war machine, but he has no idea how to operate it. He is like a man who has stolen a master musician's violin, only to produce screeching, discordant notes. The mess he has made is absolute. He wanted Sertrius' power, and now he has it, but it is the power to lead thousands of men to their deaths. The end comes with shocking speed. The once mighty Praetorian army, now under the bumbling command of Perperna, is no longer a source of terror for Pompey. It's an opportunity. The ghost that had haunted him for years has been exorcised, replaced by a clumsy amateur. Pompey, the brilliant and ruthless general, moves in for the kill. He no longer has to worry about clever ambushes or disappearing enemies. Perperna is predictable. He gathers what's left of his demoralized army, the Roman legions now stripped of most of their Spanish allies, and seeks a decisive, set-piece battle. It's a foolish move, the act of a desperate man trying to prove his generalship in the one type of combat he vaguely understands. It's exactly what Pompey has wanted for years. The two armies meet. The location isn't even significant enough to be remembered by a famous name. It's just a stretch of anonymous Spanish countryside. For you, a soldier in the ranks, the feeling before the battle is not one of grim determination, but of weary resignation. You look at the confident, well-supplied legions of Pompey arrayed before you. You look at your own thinning ranks, at the sullen, untrusting faces of your comrades. You look at Perperna trying to give a pre-battle speech, his words sounding hollow and uninspired. You know with a certainty that chills you to the bone that you are going to lose. The battle is a slaughter. It's not even a contest. Pompey's cavalry, superior in numbers and morale, easily outflanks your exposed wings. His infantry, seasoned and well-led, smashes into your center. The lines that had held firm against everything Rome could throw at them for nearly a decade now crumble in a matter of hours. Your comrades start to throw down their weapons and surrender. Others simply break and run, a full-scale panic drought. Perperna, seeing the complete collapse of his army, does not make a heroic last stand. He does not fall on his sword in the grand Roman tradition. He runs, he abandons his army, his commander's last shred of dignity, and flees into the nearby woods, hiding in a thicket like a terrified rabbit. This is a detail that the ancient historians, especially Plutarch, relate with unconcealed scorn. For a Roman aristocrat and commander to abandon his men and hide in a bush was the ultimate act of cowardice and disgrace. It was the pathetic end to a pathetic ambition. The battle is over. The great Sertorian War, which had raged for 8 long years, is finished in a single, disastrous afternoon. Pompey has his victory. It wasn't the glorious triumph over his nemesis Sertorius that he had craved, but it was a victory nonetheless. The rebellion is crushed. His soldiers round up the thousands of prisoners, including you. The fate of a captured rebel is grim. It usually means crucifixion or being sold into the brutal slavery of the mines. But then, news spreads through the captured soldiers. The hiding place of Perperna has been discovered. He was found, not by a heroic Roman legionary, but by a couple of his own cavalrymen who were also trying to desert. They drag him humiliated and begging before Pompey. This is the moment Perperna thinks he has one last card to play. In a desperate attempt to save his own life, he makes Pompey an offer. He tells him that he is in possession of Sertorius' personal correspondence. He has a whole chest full of letters, sent to Sertorius from some of the most powerful and respected senators back in Rome. These were men who were secretly hedging their bets, maintaining a treasonous line of communication with the great rebel, perhaps promising him support if he ever brought his army back to Italy. This was dynamite. Revealing these letters would trigger a massive political scandal in Rome. It would ruin careers, destroy families, and plunge the Senate into a new round of purges and paranoia. Perperna is offering to be an informant, to trade the names of his secret allies for his own miserable life. This is a fascinating historical footnote that reveals the deep political division still simmering in Rome. Sertorius wasn't just a military threat. He was a political one. The fact that prominent senators were writing to him shows that his Rome in exile was taken very seriously by the establishment. The question of who these senators were has tantalized historians for centuries, a secret that went to the grave. Pompey, presented with this explosive offer, makes a brilliant political move. He is still a young man, but he shows the cunning that will later make him one of the most powerful men in the world. He orders Perperna to bring him the chest of letters. Then, in front of his entire staff and the captured rebel officers, he takes the entire collection of documents unread and throws them into a fire. He burns them all. With this single act, he does 2 things. First, he earns the immense gratitude of every nervous senator in Rome who had ever sent a risky letter to Spain. He makes powerful friends without even knowing who they are. Second, he signals that the civil war is over. He is not interested in reopening old wounds or starting new witch hunts. He is presenting himself as a peacemaker, a unifier, not another Sulla. It is a masterstroke of public relations. And as for Perperna, the man who offered to betray everyone to save himself, having made him useless, Pompey has him executed. It's a swift, unceremonious end. Pompey has his easy win, and he has cleaned up the mess with ruthless efficiency. The war is over. The rebel army is no more. All that's left is to decide the fate of the conspirators and the thousands of captured soldiers like you. With the war over and Perperna dispatched, Pompey turns his attention to the rest of the conspirators. He is a man who appreciates efficiency, and he now has a camp full of captured rebel officers, many of whom are eager to tell him everything they know in exchange for leniency. The truth about Sertorius' assassination, which had been a poorly kept secret within the rebel army, now comes spilling out in all its sordid detail. Pompey is in a powerful position. He can be magnanimous or he can be vengeful. He chooses a course of cold, calculated justice for the main conspirators, the men who planned and carried out the murder of their commander. There is no mercy. Aufidius, the boisterous cavalry commander, Manlius, and the others who formed the core of the plot are rounded up. There is no grand trial. Their guilt is self-evident, and many of their former comrades are lining up to testify against them. According to the ancient sources, Pompey had nearly all of them executed. The only major conspirator whose fate is debated is Antonius, the man who struck the first blow. Some accounts say he was executed along with the others, but one historical source, the writer Appian, tells a different, more interesting story. He suggests that Antonius managed to escape the final battle and fled to the east, eventually finding his way into the service of Mithridates of Pontus, Sertorius's old ally. It's a darkly ironic twist if true. The man who murdered the great anti-Roman general ends up working for Rome's other great enemy. It's a detail that historians still can't confirm, a loose thread in the final tapestry of the story. But what about the others? What about the officers who were at the banquet but were not part of the plot? The ones who were coerced into silence? What about you, a common soldier who simply followed orders? Here, Pompey shows his political savvy. He makes a distinction between the guilty and the merely misguided. Most of the Roman soldiers are pardoned. Pompey's goal is not to punish every last rebel, but to pacify Spain and bring the Romans back into the fold. He offers a general amnesty. For you, this is a moment of unimaginable relief. You have survived. You will not be crucified or sold to the mines. You might even be allowed to re-enlist in a regular legion or simply given a discharge and told to find your way home. Your long, terrifying journey as a rebel is over. This clemency was a key part of Pompey's strategy. He wanted to be seen as the man who healed the wounds of civil war, not one who poured salt on them. It solidified his reputation back in Rome as a firm but fair leader. The fate of the Spanish allies who were captured is less clear, and likely much harsher. They were not Roman citizens to be reintegrated but conquered enemies. Many were likely enslaved or saw their tribal lands confiscated. Pompey's mercy had its limits, and those limits usually ended at the border of Roman citizenship. This brings us to one of the most intriguing parts of the whole affair, the final disposition of Perperna's papers. Pompey made a great public show of burning the chest of Sertorius's correspondence, winning him political points for his discretion. But did he really burn all of it? This is a point of cynical debate among historians. Pompey was a master politician. Is it really plausible that he would destroy such a valuable cache of political intelligence without even taking a peek? Some scholars speculate that the public burning was pure theater. They suggest that Pompey, or one of his trusted aides, likely went through the letters first, making a private list of the names of the compromising senators. He would never use this information publicly, but he would keep it as a form of private political blackmail, a list of powerful men in Rome who owed him their careers and their silence. It's a conspiracy theory of sorts, but one grounded in a deep understanding of Roman political reality. Information was power, and it's hard to imagine a man as ambitious as Pompey literally burning such power to ashes. This theory casts his magnanimous act in a much more calculating light. He wasn't just being a statesman. He was quietly building his own network of influence for the future struggles that he knew lay ahead. So the conspirators meet their end. The ambitious Perperna dies begging in a bush. The brutal Aufidius faces a Roman executioner's sword. Their grand plot to save themselves by murdering their leader ends in their own destruction. They sought to escape a war they were losing, only to bring about their own swift and total annihilation. Their betrayal bought them nothing but disgrace and death. The final irony is that Sertorius, the man they thought was leading them to ruin, was the only thing that had been keeping them alive. And so, the dust settles over Spain. Pompey returns to Rome, not with the triumph he craved for defeating Sertorius, but with a lesser celebration for pacifying the province. The Sertorian War becomes a closed chapter in the annals of the Republic, but the ghost of Sertorius and the questions surrounding his rebellion linger on. This is where we step back from the narrative and enter the long, echoing halls of historical debate. The central question, the one that scholars and armchair historians have argued about for 2 millennia, is a classic what if. What if the conspiracy had failed? What if Sertorius had not been assassinated at that banquet? Could he have actually won? Let's break down the arguments. On one side, you have the Sertorian optimists. They argue that Sertorius was on a viable path to, if not conquering Rome, then at least creating a permanent, independent state in Spain. They point to several key pieces of evidence. First, his military genius was undeniable. For 8 years, he had consistently outfought and outfought every general Rome sent against him, including the great Pompey. Pompey's own desperate letter to the Senate, begging for more men and money and threatening to retreat, is their exhibit A. They argue this is proof that the Roman war effort was on the brink of collapse. Furthermore, they point to the alliance with Mithridates. This wasn't just a minor diplomatic coup. It was a genuine second front, with the Pontic king tying up Roman resources in the east and Sertorius bleeding them dry in the west. The Republic was stretched to its breaking point. The optimists suggest that given a few more years, the political situation in Rome, which was always volatile, might have shifted. Perhaps a new faction would have risen to power, one willing to negotiate a peace that would have recognized Sertorius's rule in Spain, allowing him and his men to live out their lives as masters of a new, breakaway Roman Republic. On the other side, you have the Roman realists. They contend that Sertorius's cause was ultimately doomed, and that his assassination merely hastened the inevitable. Their argument is based on the simple, brutal arithmetic of Roman power. The Republic had a seemingly inexhaustible supply of manpower and resources. They could lose armies and generals and simply raise new ones. Sertorius, on the other hand, had a finite pool of Roman exiles and a fickle alliance with Spanish tribes. The realists argue that Sertorius's strategy of guerrilla warfare was a brilliant tactic for survival, but it was not a strategy for ultimate victory. He could sting, but he couldn't kill. He could never have gathered enough strength to invade Italy and take Rome, which was the only way to truly win the war. They also point to his deteriorating leadership in the final years. His paranoia, his execution of the Spanish hostages, these were not the actions of a leader on the path to victory, but of a man cracking under unbearable pressure. They argue that his coalition was already crumbling from within. Even without the assassination, his Spanish allies would have eventually deserted him, and his own Romans would have mutinied. The conspiracy, in their view, was a symptom of a disease, not the cause of death. This debate will, of course, never be resolved. History does not allow for do-overs. We can only speculate. Then there is the debate over his legacy. How should we remember Quintus Sertorius? Was he a traitor to Rome, a renegade who allied himself with barbarians and for unkings to satisfy his own ambition? This was certainly the view of his enemies in the Sulan faction. They painted him as just another power-hungry warlord in an age full of them. Or was he, as Plutarch and other sympathetic writers suggest, the last true republican? Was he a patriot who was trying to preserve the ideals of the old Roman Republic against the tyranny of a dictator? In this view, his Roman exile in Spain was not an act of treason, but an act of preservation. He was keeping the flame of liberty alive, hoping to one day restore it to its rightful home. They see him as a tragic hero, a man of immense talent and principle who was simply on the wrong side of a brutal civil war. The truth, as it so often does, probably lies somewhere in the murky middle. He was likely a complex mixture of both, a brilliant, ambitious man who genuinely believed in his cause, but was also willing to be utterly ruthless to achieve his goals. He was a product of his violent, chaotic times. For you, standing on the dusty plains of Spain after your pardon, these academic debates might seem distant, but you lived it. You saw the charismatic leader who inspired hope. You saw the brilliant general who ran rings around Pompey. You saw the paranoid tyrant who lost control. And you saw him lying dead on a banquet floor. You don't need a historian to tell you what happened. You were there. You know that whatever his ultimate goal was, whatever his legacy should be, his story is a timeless lesson in how genius can be undone, not by an enemy's sword, but by a friend's dagger. The pardon from Pompey feels less like a gift and more like a release from a long, feverish dream. The war is over. You are alive. Those two simple facts take a long time to sink in. You watch as the remnants of the Praetorian army are broken up. Some men are drafted into Pompey's legions, sent to fight in other parts of the vast Roman world. Others, like you, are simply let go, left to your own devices and all, and that is no longer a battlefield, but is not yet home. You begin the long, slow journey back toward a life you thought you had lost forever. As you travel, you see the deep scars the war has left on the Spanish landscape. You pass by the ruins of fortified villages, their stone walls blackened by fire. You see fields that are overgrown with weeds, their irrigation ditches collapsed. This land has paid a heavy price for hosting a Roman civil war. The Spanish people you encounter look at you with weary, tired eyes. You are a Roman. And for nearly a decade, the sight of a Roman, any Roman, meant trouble. They are rebuilding, slowly, quietly. They are survivors, just like you. The fierce warriors who fought alongside you have melted back into the mountains and valleys. Their falcata is perhaps exchanged for farming tools. Their war cries replaced by the quiet rhythms of a life reclaimed. As you get closer to the coast, to the port towns that connect Spain with the rest of the Mediterranean, you start to hear news from Rome. Pompey's return was a triumph. He is the man of the hour, the hero who pacified Spain. The name Sertorius, if it is mentioned at all, is spoken as a cautionary tale, a boogeyman, a traitor who got what he deserved. The official history is already being written, and it has no room for the nuances you witnessed. It is a story of good versus evil, of Rome versus its enemies, and you know with a certainty that settles deep in your bones that the story is wrong. You think about the men you served with. You think of Perperna, whose ambition was a bottomless pit that consumed him and everyone around him. You think of the fierce Spanish chieftains whose loyalty was so strong and yet so fragile. You think of the white fawn, that symbol of a time when the rebellion felt magical and full of promise, before it all curdled into paranoia and blood. And most of all, you think of him, Quintus Sertorius, the one-eyed general. You try to reconcile the two men who live in your memory. There is the brilliant commander, the man who could inspire hope with a single speech, the leader who knew your name and asked about your family. And then there is the other Sertorius, the dark, suspicious man who ruled by fear and butchered his allies' children. Were they two different people? Or were they two sides of the same coin, the light and the shadow that exist in any great leader pushed to the absolute limit? This is the question that stays with you, long after the physical wounds have healed. It's a question about loyalty and betrayal, about the intoxicating poison of power, and about the impossibly fine line between a hero and a tyrant. You saw a man who tried to build a new Rome, only to succumb to the very same political diseases that had plagued the old one: ambition, jealousy, and fear. His camp, which was meant to be a refuge from tyranny, ended up creating a tyrant of its own. Years pass. You might find a new life for yourself in a quiet provincial town, or perhaps you even make it back to Italy, to a home you no longer recognize. The Praetorian War fades into memory, a story you tell to your grandchildren who listen with wide, unbelieving eyes. You tell them of a one-eyed general and his magic deer, of years spent fighting in the Spanish mountains, of a rebellion that almost broke the world. You lived through the end of an era. The death of Sertorius was more than just the death of a man. It was one of the last guests of the old Roman Republic, the world that came after. The world of Pompey, Caesar, and Augustus would be one of powerful individuals, of dictators and emperors, the dream of a republic of equals, The very dream that Sertorius claimed to be fighting for was dying all across the Roman world. You were there to watch one of its final, tragic chapters play out, not in the grand Senate House of Rome, but in a bloody banquet tent on the dusty frontier of Spain. You survived, and you remember. And so, the story comes to a close. The echoes of that distant war have faded now, carried away on the gentle breeze of time. You can feel the weight of that history begin to lift from your shoulders, leaving behind only the quiet stillness of the night. The figures of Sertorius, Pompey, and Perperna dissolve back into the pages from which they came, their ambitions and their betrayals melting into the soft fabric of a dream that is already beginning to form in your mind. The dust of the Spanish playing settles. The oil lamps in the banquet tent flicker and go out, and all that remains is the deep, peaceful silence of a story that has been told. Let the narrative drift away now, like a boat sailing silently away from the shore, carrying its cargo of ghosts into the mist. There is nothing left to do but rest, to let your own thoughts grow slow and quiet, merging with the soft hum of the world outside your window. The long journey is over. It is time to sleep. The end of the article. Good night.